Greetings, Hibernians. It seems there's been a lot of mixed and conflicting information out there surrounding my attempted audit regarding my first commercial game, Primordia, from my ex-publisher, Wadjet Eye Games. So I felt it behooved me to, at the very least, provide you with some form of explanation while attempting to be as unbiased and neutral in my approach as possible at this point. I will create a more detailed breakdown of facts and events solely from my perspective sometime in the future, because there really is so much more to this, but I at least wanted to, as impartially as possible, break down the essential details for anyone that might be curious, or just had heard part of the story from any of our ends. I'll be pulling up some relevant text to support many of the more pertinent statements made, and for completion's sake if nothing else. Some of this may flash up briefly, so feel free to pause the video to read them, as obviously I'd like to provide as much context as possible as well, something that has been sorely missing from a lot of the info currently out there in regards to this whole, for lack of a better word, debacle. Honestly, again, this video is made for general informative purposes rather than any attempt at really even partially or certainly fully explaining or rather showing my own side of the events that transpired. This short video will break down into 3 parts, while attempting to keep any personal thoughts or details bookending the video with my career leading up to Primordia, the founding of Wormwood Studios, and some personal realizations towards the end. Part 1. Forming Wormwood Studios and Primordia's development basics. While I could delve into almost infinite detail here, I'll try to keep this brief, as there is rather a lot to get to overall. I had made a few small games in AGS, Adventure Game Studio, prior to starting Primordia, including a short adventure game that revolved around a small floating robot helping his bipedal counterpart aboard an airship called Trial of the Schnellsparrow, or TOTS for short. Creating this project solo in AGS led directly to my starting work on Primordia, where I wanted to expand the scope of the adventure games I was creating. I decided to bring some help on board this time around, as I thought it might be better than working solo. I put out some calls online and brought some other people on board my fledgling project to build a team to make what I hoped at the time would be my quote-unquote masterpiece, in the old sense of the term, a piece of work that a student creates in order to become a master of their craft, etc., and take my first big step into the commercial side of the games industry as a career. This was June of 2010. After my pre-production design period for Primordia, which was primarily world building, early character and plot design, as well as an early game build prototype, which I had of course created in AGS, which would go on to become our final game build eventually after many iterations. I had been writing dialogue, coding, and producing music for Primordia myself up to that point, but I felt that focusing on directing and leading the project, as well as of course still doing all the art assets myself, might lead to a more rounded game and experience for the player overall. I hired a musician, a writer, and eventually also someone more familiar with AGS than myself to take over many, if not all, of my coding duties as well, at around the 6 months mark into production. Production continued into 2011, at which point I was approached by Dave Gilbert of Wadjet Eye Games, WEG for short, to publish Primordia on my behalf. My main concern at this point was getting my team, and myself of course, paid for our hard work, and as Dave was quite well known in the indie adventure community at the time for his self-published Blackwell games, I felt signing us up with WEG was a good way to ensure our viability in the market, for lack of a better word. It wasn't easy to get your game noticed back then, despite my knowing from the get-go I had made something I thought was pretty special at the time. I think my team saw that too. After all, it was my initial ideas, world building, and game prototype that had gotten them interested in joining my project in the first place. But it wasn't all peaches and cream. There were a lot of ups and downs that were never at all talked about after the fact, after release. Production wasn't easy. I don't think any game development process is, however. I found myself cautioned creatively by Dave quite frequently as soon as I had signed the contract with him. Even though my writer, who also happened to be a lawyer, had helped secure a very explicit and mutually favorable contract. There are many examples. Suffice to say, I was forced to fire most of my original staff / friends by Dave at one point, and this decision weighed heavily on me. It was not part of our original agreement, nor part of our contract, so it was pretty difficult for me to capitulate fully to Dave's quote-unquote demands, for lack of a better word. I eventually just went with what Dave, and I suppose Mark, the writer / lawyer I brought on board, wanted. We all saw the project to its conclusion. despite problems on all our ends. We got through it and made it real. Primordia was released on December 5th, 2012, to mixed yet positive critical reaction overall, though it seemed for a brief moment to be doing at least one thing correctly from the start that I had sought to achieve, despite it being significantly different to my original vision. It looked like we might be making a decent amount of sales to pay my team and I on the back end in royalties from sales. So at least next project around could be exactly how I wanted it in every way. I'd be able to fund it myself and complete the project without losing my friends and compromising my artistic vision due to changes required by a publisher. I love Primordia, but it wasn't easy. A lot of the things I fought for during production, Crispin's lack of arms, the name of the game itself, the name of our studio, many other things were very personal to me that I had to fight to keep in game. Turns out they were what people loved about it in the long run. But I digress. So I'll stick to the bare basics and perhaps delve into the actual production itself, which was gargantuan, at a later date. Part 2. Post-release publisher problems with WEG and Primordia audit denial. Problems began to arise almost immediately after release with Dave's pay system. Mix-ups and continued lateness became a chronic problem over the years. Earliness, too. Money seemed to drop very sharply, even though the game itself appeared to become more and more popular over the years. And it just seemed to get worse, not better.